Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast, sponsored by Darla Cashin of RBC Wealth Management. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Folk. This week we talk with Leah Meisel, the COVID community coordinator at Justus Health. We talk about what brought her to and kept her in the Twin Cities, the nature of her job, and the importance of recognizing the health inequities in society on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Leah Meisel, welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Well, we are excited to have you. You work for a really interesting organization, which until we talked last week, I had never heard of, and it's really doing fantastic work, especially now. You're the COVID, is it a program coordinator?
COVID community coordinator is my official role title.
Okay, at Justus Health.
Yeah.
So I guess for starters, tell us a little bit about Justus Health and then what it is you do at the organization.
Yeah. So Justus Health is formerly known as the Minnesota AIDS Project. It actually used to be three different organizations, and then they all kind of joined together a few years ago. I believe it was in 2017. To create Justus Health. And so we are a health equity nonprofit that is focused on serving the LGBTQ community and people living with HIV, as well as other people from underserved communities within the Twin Cities. And we have a pretty wide variety of programming. Our programming is pretty comprehensive. We have everything from advocacy and research to a behavioral health clinic, to client services that help individuals, such as like our AIDS line, case management, transportation services, financial assistance, as well as like MNsure counselors. And we also have a huge education and prevention focus. So we do a lot of education and training and provide HIV and LGBTQ competency to organizations around the area. We have Shift MN, which fights for healthier LGBTQ communities by severing ties with corporate tobacco. We have a whole bunch of other stuff. We have our mainline syringe exchange and HIV testing. And now, starting in November, we started having our COVID hotline, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about. But basically, we provide a pretty robust collection of resources to our target community and to the Twin Cities community in general.
All right, lots of things to unpack in this.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm curious that you mentioned, though, you really focusing on sort of an underserved community when it comes to healthcare. Do you have a sense of how many people that is? Not necessarily how many you serve, but sort of what the size of the underserved community is?
Oh gosh, I do not know. I know that I couldn't tell you numbers, but I do know that it's a lot. I think it's hard to know exactly what those numbers are, just because there are a lot of people that go uncounted for.
Exactly. It's just I was just going to say they go uncounted because they're underserved. It's hard to know exactly how to put numbers to that because they are because they're underserved.
Yeah, exactly. But I do know that we serve a lot of people, and more people are kind of coming in every day, and we're also trying to find new ways every day of how to reach a greater population within our community and try to increase our outreach. And so I would say a lot is my best answer to that. But yeah.
No, that's totally fair. So you said in November was when the COVID hotline started.
Yeah.
How, because so much of the, I guess, the reaction to COVID and how to best fight it in terms of testing and immunization, hopefully once we can all start getting immunized,
Mm-hmm.
How does an organization like yours fit into the sort of, I guess, bigger picture of bureaucracy that is involved with COVID? Because as I've learned in the last 11 odd months. There is no shortage of bureaucracy when it comes to this.
Yes. Yeah, that is a very, very true statement. So the COVID Community Coordinator program that Justus Health has is actually, we are one of, I believe, 40 different community-based organizations in the Twin Cities that is collaborating with the Minnesota Department of Health. And they are the ones who are providing kind of the funding and the resources to allow this COVID Community Coordinator program to happen. So they're kind of like our, not only our like collaborator, but also kind of our parent organization. And not parent organization, that's not the correct term, but they're kind of making this happen. And so we're also getting CARES Act funding, which is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. So between the CARES Act and our collaboration with the Minnesota Department of Health, that's kind of how we are getting funded, how our program is happening. And so a bunch of different organizations applied to this program back in, I think, during the summer around there. And then we were one of the organizations that were chosen to kind of move forward and have COVID community coordinators. And it's a really, really cool program because, so obviously with Justus Health, the LGBTQ community and people living with HIV are being served through this program, but a bunch of other organizations are helping communities like the Hmong community, the Somali community, immigrant and refugee communities as well, and the disability community. All different types of populations are being served, and they're all underserved in some capacity, and so it's really making sure that we are addressing the fact that certain populations are at a higher risk of testing positive for COVID and experiencing worse health outcomes. So we want to make sure that we are adequately resourcing those, community-based organizations that can help those communities and ensure that those populations are, of a specific focus and connect them to testing or whatever COVID-related resources that they may need.
So are you working, if not necessarily in partnership, but do you work like in communication with some of the other coordinators at some of these other programs like Justus Health?
Yeah. So every Tuesday morning, we, all of the COVID community coordinators, or CCCs for short, we all have a meeting with Minnesota Department of Health to just go over kind of what are the new updates, what are the new developments in the COVID sphere, and how can we best communicate all of that new information as well as old information to our target communities. And within those conversations, we, all talk about, sometimes we'll have breakout rooms and talk about, okay, what has worked in terms of getting the word out there about our hotlines or about our programs, what hasn't worked, and what are ways that we can all increase our outreach and increase our impact in our communities. So it's nice in that we do get a lot of guidance both from MDH and also from other organizations, but we're also able to kind of create our own identity within our own program and say like, okay, this is something that worked for a different organization, but this might not work for our organization. How can we create some feature of our program or like some event or something that allows us to have like kind of that same impact, but maybe in a little bit of a different way, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And it's nice that you're not going at this alone. You're not trying to create the wheel. There are others who are all sort of, if not the same boat, certainly similar boats.
Yeah,
that you can all sort of work together and bounce ideas off each other, and that you have some, MDH support in that regard also. Mm-hmm. Which I would also think would be helpful, especially the last part, because again, as I've learned following this from much farther away than you are, the information feels like it changes constantly. It's very whiplash-like in the sense that you think you know what's happening and you think you know what you know, and then oops, maybe not quite so much.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's nice in that regard that we do get, there have even been times when a great example is when the CDC changed their quarantine recommendations from 14 days to now there are like 3 different options for quarantine if you need to quarantine, which is great. That allows a little bit more flexibility for certain people, or, if you really need to go back to your job in person, or you can't quarantine for a certain amount of time, whatever your situation may be, that allows that flexibility and it allows you to have some choice in the matter. But MDH was like, stick to the 14-day quarantine if you can, maybe don't advertise these other options unless it seems like it's really going to be a problem for the person, or at least know that they have a few different options, but make sure you include that 14-day quarantine. And so that was back in November. Things have changed a little bit since then, but that was a really nice example of okay, we're getting information from 1,000 different resources. The CDC is saying one thing, I don't know, Dr. Fauci is saying another thing. We don't know exactly what we should be focusing on, what we should be telling our community members. Can we get a little guidance here? And MDH has been really good in providing that kind of focused information and making sure that we know what we at least should be communicating and what we should be able to explain to other people.
That's got to be super helpful. I mean, and call me cynical, but feel like that, you don't have to do 14 days, maybe 10 is okay from the CDC was, you said November. As I recall, that was right before Thanksgiving when there was a big fear that people were all going to get together.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and to be fair, I mean, there's no one right answer when it comes to quarantine or anything regarding COVID, because we're still in the first year of this pandemic. We still, we've learned a lot since March, which is great, but we also still have so much more to learn. And I couldn't imagine being in any of their situations, but it's again, nice to have a little bit of guidance and have some people telling us okay, this is what you're hearing. This is what to do with this information.
So you're originally from Cleveland. You came here to go to school at McAllister.
Mm-hmm.
You graduated recently. What was it that kept you in the Twin Cities?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, so originally I had a different job when I graduated from McAllister, and that job, I had gotten it during spring break of senior year, and then let's see, that was mid-March, and I got the job. I got the verbal offer on a Friday, and the following Monday was the day that everyone schools started going virtual, people started working from home, stuff just COVID really
stopped.
Yeah, everything. COVID stopped everything halted, and so including the organization that I was going to work for. And so it was a very long it was quite an ordeal, but I had a job offer with this organization, and they kept on extending the job, extending the contract, saying okay, we're going to start in July, we're going to start in August, okay, we're going to get you the offer letter in a couple of weeks. And it was quite a process. And then I ended up I got the job, and then 3 weeks later in late July, I lost that job, which was a tough experience for sure. It was pretty disheartening. But it fortunately opened up a lot of opportunities for me in terms of okay, maybe this job wasn't the one for me. Maybe there's something else out there for me. And fortunately, a few months later, I found this CCC position at Justus Health, and it kind of fit perfectly for in terms of what I really wanted to do and the population that I wanted to serve. So I guess to answer your original question, a job is what kept me in the Twin Cities immediately after graduation. And at that point, I had a network here, and there were a lot of, this is a really good city to be in if you want to get into public and community health. And so just the opportunities that are available here is what ended up ultimately keeping me here.
So is that your sort of, I say background, but I guess your degree, was it something in a public health field then?
Actually, no. I actually got a degree in neuroscience and psychology. But similar to many people, I'm not doing anything related to what I studied. I spent 4 years learning about like the intricacies of like the brain and neurotransmission and very like cellular and molecular and behavioral sciences. And now I'm not doing any of that, with the exception of like maybe learning. I mean, it's helpful in being able to learn about like COVID and the vaccines and kind of how those things work at a very, very basic scientific level. But otherwise, I'm not doing anything related to my degree, which is interesting, but allows me to learn a lot, and has allowed me to learn a ton in my job so far.
And I mean, obviously, you're working in a job that, but for this, this situation we're all living through wouldn't even exist.
Yeah, exactly. Which is,
but on the flip side, you probably would have your other job.
Yeah, true. So I don't know. I mean, it's interesting how it worked out. I think I like this job more than I would have liked the other job, which is just kind of weird how things work out. But usually I try to just say like, things happen for a reason. And I think not that COVID happened for a reason. I think COVID has, been pretty detrimental to society and has been hard on all of us in a variety of different ways. But in some ways, I think that it's been a huge learning opportunity for all of us.
Oh, no question. No question. I mean, and it has been hard. I think, like the emotional, socially, physically, it's been hard. I think it's been a hard year for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you sort of connect the work that you're doing with your Judaism? Is there a way that you sort of find connection to, the Judaism through the work and vice versa?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, so I grew up in a family that was very community oriented and very kind of community service oriented. My parents were involved on 1,000 different boards and committees. My siblings and I always said like they have to be in like 2 places at once. They can't be like just, they're superheroes or something. Like something's got to be going on for them to be able to do like this much stuff. But in doing all of that stuff, they really kind of ingrained these values of tzedakah and giving back to your community in my mind and in my siblings' minds as well. And so that was something that, drove me to do a lot of, from the time I was young, a lot of community service and a lot of, again, community-oriented work. I don't know, we volunteered at like nursing homes. Eventually, I served on a few different teen philanthropy boards. I continued doing philanthropy through college or through high school and college. And that was something that I always really connected with, being able to serve my community in kind of like a myriad of ways, not only being able to do like direct service, working at the nursing home, working with residents there and volunteering for holiday luncheons or whatever it was, but also kind of being able to do behind the scenes work, raising money for organizations, putting on events that, the proceeds from an event goes to an organization of my choosing or something like that. And that was something that always like really brought me joy and really brought me a sense of purpose and also in a way connected me back to my parents and my siblings and my grandparents and kind of my whole family. And so I think right now the work that I'm doing allows me to do exactly what has brought me joy in the past, which again is doing partially this behind the scenes work of, educating myself and other people and being on this COVID resource line for Justus Health and kind of just being like a voice of support and a voice of just like a voice of like knowledge in some ways and connecting people to the resources that they need, but also being able to like be out in the communities, go to testing sites or vaccination sites and just kind of be there for people and say like, okay, like, do you have any questions? If you have questions, let me know. Like, I want to be kind of like this figure of support and this figure of just like someone that you can trust and someone that you can go to, and a smiling face under a mask that you can relate to while you're while you're going through what is a very difficult time for many people. And so that's something that continues to drive my work, just being able to be kind of this like, some sort of leg of support for my community and for the people around me. And that's, I think that's the most like, that's the part of my work, I think, that I most relate to, like my Jewish values and my Jewish upbringing.
That's so cool. And it's definitely hard to be the smiling face when nobody can actually see your full face.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's in the eyes though.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also hard when people like, people are like at testing sites and they clearly don't want to be there and they're just like kind of grumpy or whatever. But, at the end of the day, the work that I'm doing and that I'm helping my community to do is super important. And, every little bit counts, especially when you are trying to defeat a very smart virus and a very challenging global pandemic.
And I'll tell you though, the sort of being that smiling face and that calming presence at a testing site, having gone to one of the state's testing sites, it is sort of comforting. I wasn't personally concerned that I was going to test positive, but there was an possible exposure, and so we, my daughter and I went, and like the people there talked us through how to register and log in, and it's a whole process, but they were great. It made it really easy and very comforting. So it's important work. And
absolutely. I'm glad that type of work went noticed, or that you noticed that, because I think sometimes it gets a little tough and it's a very redundant job in many ways. But yeah, it's always nice to know that there are people that like appreciate the work that we're doing, and under their masks, they're smiling as well.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. It's hard. It's a, I think a emptied out Office Depot or Office Max or something where we went with just a bunch of tables lined up and a lot of people spitting in tubes. And
it's quite a scene.
I mean, it is quite a scene, and it's certainly not glamorous work by any means.
Yeah.
Obviously, right now in the world we're in is probably some of the most important work you could be doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the field. So I mean, it's definitely important. So having sort of this experience, obviously this, very different from what your schooling is in, as, eventually this crisis will end and there'll be other things, what are you looking for something within Justus Health in that world that you can maybe transition to, or are you looking to sort of take this experience and, carry it on to something else?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and one I am kind of trying to answer right now. I think I love working at Justus Health. I think it's an insanely cool organization, and as I mentioned earlier on, there's just a huge breadth of programming and resources that we provide. So I think it would be really cool to stay there and transition into some other non-COVID related position at some point. But I think that will just depend on kind of the contracts that become available and what the future of this program and other programs that Justus Health puts on, what kind of the future of those are. But I mean, in general, I think, I would really like to stay in like community and public health. I think it's a really fascinating area. I think there's a ton of work to be done. And, I think really, this pandemic has kind of underscored so many of the existing inequities that exist within society. And I think also has highlighted just how much systemic racism impacts everyday life, and how bad it really is. And so I think that that's something that I want to continue working on, like health equity, and being able to, something that kind of is driving me forward is being able to work on customizing healthcare and health resources for people in underserved communities. And I'm particularly interested, I think, down the line in like mental and behavioral health, because, I did study neuroscience, and I've always had a pretty huge fascination with mental health in general. And so I think that that's something I would like to continue doing. But as for what exactly I will do to explore that area, I'm not really sure. And I honestly don't know what jobs post-COVID are going to look like and what's going to be available. So kind of like what happened with this job, I'm getting ready, or I'm excited to just kind of see what's out there and let things happen, and just kind of see where the wind takes me a little bit.
Well, that's awesome. And, it's interesting that I think one of the big takeaways from this year, not just because of COVID, but from the racial equity challenges that have really come out this year, is how the racial inequities that we've learned about in the health system, in public health, and how important it is to have, to narrow that gap, because it really is. The disparities are really quite shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, I mean, there's no shortage of work to be done. But I think it's important to know that, like, I think to continue having, like, health education programs and resource navigation, I kind of think about, like, okay, this is something that, like the COVID community coordinator program, I think is super awesome and incredibly necessary for COVID itself. But like, moving forward, could we have similar types of programs for various issues? Could we have these partnerships between state organizations and community-based organizations for just like everyday problems? And I know that many of those partnerships already do exist, but can we expand that programming? Can we really like focus in on certain injustice populations, and what more can we do that is like similar to this type of programming, and what can we learn from this type of programming to be able to just like make, have this greater impact, and really expand our resources and our support to those communities that have just been so severely mistreated and just have experienced such, trauma within healthcare. I mean, within the society in general, but especially within healthcare and public health.
And I think, obviously this is hardly a positive per se, but, if nothing else, all of the traumas that we've witnessed and been through this year have really helped bring that to the fore. So there is this greater and heightened level of awareness that I think most people had no clue about.
Yeah. So not a positive, but a necessary thing, like just super necessary. And it's unfortunate that it took a global pandemic to bring these issues to the forefront, and for these things to be very present in people's minds. But I'm hoping that now, we can just keep learning and say like, okay, this is what happened, or like, this is what COVID and, George Floyd and everything showed us. Like, what are we going to learn? What are we going to use to move forward and really address these issues in like, a very as effective of a way as possible.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Leah, thank you so much. Last two questions, and we'll let you get out of here.
Awesome.
What is your favorite Jewish food?
Ooh, I would have to say challah. I love baking, and so I'm exploring the art of baking challah. But also, my mom has always been like the challah baker in our family. And by family, I mean like we have a pretty large extended family. And so she'll make these challahs that are like just ginormous. And it's, you know, her like grandmother's recipe. And the challahs have to be like, I don't know, they're round and they're probably like about a foot in diameter and like maybe about 18 inches high or something. Like they can get to be that high. They're huge and they are amazing. And she'll like, you know, send us like a piece of them. So she'll send me and my siblings a piece of them every once in a while for the holidays, or, you know, send us a smaller version at some other points. But that's something that not only do I love to make, and making it always reminds me of spending time with my mom and my family, but also it's super fun to eat. It's a very versatile food. And you can do a lot of different creative things with it as well.
For sure. No, we make challah every few weeks. We usually we make a batch and, you know, have one loaf and freeze a couple others. And so we do. I've gotten very good at braiding.
Yeah.
My daughters do question how I can braid the challah, but not their hair, which they did when I was younger. When they were younger, they questioned that. It is very different.
Yeah.
Very different. Fortunately, they're old enough they can braid their own hair. They don't need me, so that's fine.
There you go.
I think they're certainly happy about that. And lastly, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
I'd have to say Passover. I think not only is it a really cool holiday in terms of, you know, what it stands for and you know, freedom, fighting for what you believe is right, and fighting for your own rights, but also Passover is kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. It's huge in my family. As I was saying, I have a pretty large extended family. On my mom's side, and so every year when COVID is not a thing, everyone from all over the country, sometimes even like other countries, come into Cleveland, which is kind of our family's home base. And for our Passover Seders, the first night is usually like between 30 and 50 people. And then the second night we have to literally like rent out a ballroom, and it's like 150 people at our Seder, which is just like crazy. I thought that was a normal thing growing up. And then as I met more Jewish people, they were like, oh, our Seder is like 10 people, or it's going to be huge this year. It's 20 people. And how many are at yours? And I was like, oh, it's like 150 or something like that. But it's always a really fun event in my family.
It's not a Seder. That's a
it's
a Seder. That's a wedding.
It's like a wedding. Yeah, exactly. But it's a lot of fun and very, very family oriented. And it's nice that it continues to be such an important tradition in my family. And yeah, it's just a cool time to not only be able to celebrate the Jewish people and freedom, and also consider, you know, question what freedom is in society, and how can, how does that relate to modern day? I think there are a lot of parallels between the Passover story and modern day, but also it's a huge time of like celebration and just like enjoying family's company, in my experience.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, I think, again, another thing this year is pointed out as often is the parallels of the Passover story in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely.
No question. Well, Leah Meisel, thank you so much for joining me this week. It is great to get to know you, and thank you for the important work you're doing at Justus Health.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
The Who the Folk podcast is a product of Jewfolk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for future guests, please send them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.